Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, it's Zoe, and my question for you is this. Have you got the capacity for delayed gratification? Would you turn down $25 million today for a chance at $75 million in 10 years from now? I'm not sure that I could turn down $25 million today, to be frank. You see, our brains are not wired for long-term delays. We are immediate gratification entities. It's helped us stay alive and survive for so long. That's all well and good when it comes to making sure that we eat and sleep and reproduce. It's not so good when we're trying to think about long-term strategic value, especially when it comes to our work and our organizations. Well, my guest today argues that battle against our brains and our impulses is worth fighting. Joel Strom, he is an author and expert with absolute street credibility when it comes to strategic value and long-term strategic value in businesses. He is the chief value officer and sort of set up this idea of turning CEOs into chief value officers. Let me tell you about some of his successes. He helped grow a company from 15 million to 95 million in sales, culminating in a $350 million sale in less than 10 years. That's quite extraordinary growth. And he helped another sell for 75 million just 3 years after losing a $25 million offer. Didn't have to wait 10 years for your 75, just 3 years to triple your $25 million offer. Maybe I could hang out 3 years. So he knows how to take organizations, particularly manufacturing, that's his background, and help the CEOs and the teams and the staff turn a business into a long-term value proposition. And in our conversation today, we explore, what does that actually mean? What is value? Why do it? And what's in it for the staff? I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. Joel Strom, all the way from fabulous Phoenix, Arizona. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here all the way from there and talking to you all the way in Australia.
I love that dynamic of modern technology that allows us to do this. It's just so fantastic. And I'm also really excited about your work. You know, you've got this new book out called The CEO to CVO. And yes, we will unpack what CVO means. And I think it has some really core fundamentals that any CEO can grasp onto if they're going to add value to their organization, which is CVO, Chief Value Officer. So tell me about, first of all, the impetus for this book. Why did you decide, after so many years of working in the space, to produce a book?
Well, it was one of those bucket list items that I just didn't have the time to do all these years. What happened was I had been working with closely held growing businesses, helping the CEOs create value in their business, maximize the value, and had developed a lot of processes to do that with. And then back in the beginning of 2015, I was approached by a client company to see if I would be interested in being an interim CEO for them for a short period of time. It was a manufacturing company here in Arizona. And it was a challenge, and I couldn't pass it up. And I said, well, I'll just do this for a few months. And then they came back and said, would you be our permanent CEO? And so I stayed with them for 5 years. And so I left consulting. I went in to run this business. And what it did in my running that business is I really got to see whether all the things I'd been telling people for all these years about creating value really worked. And they did.
Phew.
Yeah, phew is right. But after 5 years, it was time to step back out again and turn the reins over to someone else. And so I decided I'm going back into, I created a company called Chief Value Officers because I didn't want to go back to my old company, and decided that part of that was going to be to write a book and put everything that I had, or at least a bit of what I had learned over the last many, many years of creating value with clients and creating value in this company that I was running as a CEO, put it down so that it had some documentation, I guess.
That's excellent to codify your expertise and experience. I want to start with a really, really basic question,
Sure.
which is when you're talking about a private company, what do you mean by value?
That's a great question. Typically, when you think of value, when people think of value in a company, it's what can I sell this business for? And I may call on a client or start to talk to a potential client, and they tell me, look, we're not ready to sell. We're not even thinking about selling yet. Why do I need to worry about value? Why don't I just need to grow my business? Well, to me, the a valuable company, creating value in a company does so much more than get you a higher sale price when you do decide to sell. Because to me, where you build value in a company is by creating, as my subtitle says on the book, an extraordinary company. If I can build a great company, an extraordinary company, a company that I refer to as a gotta have company, where someone says, boy, if I'm going to buy a company, I got to have that company. I can't deal with just a normal company. If I can get my business to that point, then I've maximized the value. And again, I can sell my company for a lot of money, or if I decide not to sell it, I can lay on the beach in Hawaii and collect checks because someone else is going to run this company for me because it's such a great, extraordinary company. It also provides some what I call financial insurance for the family of the owner. So if something happens, and this really ties into leadership as well, if the owner of a business is so important to the business that it can't run without that person there, then if something happens to that person, the value of the business and thus what the heirs of the business are going to get starts to go down immediately. So if you could have a company that is high value because it's an extraordinary, great company, then people are going to mourn you for a few days, but the business is going to keep on rolling, and your family
Just a
can,
few days, huh?
yeah, right, and then the family can decide what it wants to do. It can keep the business and have someone else run it. It can sell it. It can do a lot of things. It has a lot of options. So a valuable company provides the owner and their family with options of what they can do with the business. And on the other side, from an
So
operational side,
what's that?
oh, go ahead.
Mhm. I want to know what the star power is in terms of what makes a gotta have it. Maybe you were getting to that point, but like if I'm a gotta have it company, what's my je ne sais quoi? What's my star power around that?
Well, it's usually not just one thing. What the book talks about and what I've worked with my clients on over the years is what I call strategic value. And strategic value has four pillars. There's a financial pillar, an operational pillar, a strategic pillar, and what I call the industry pillar. And to have a really standout company, to have a real gotta have business, all of those pillars are important to the value. It's like four legs of a table. If they're uneven, the table's going to wobble. And if you can work on all four of those pillars, and there's a lot of components within the pillar, more components than we have time to talk about here. We could talk about some examples. But if you can check off all the components within the pillar, and that leg of that table is really strong, and it can keep it steady, then you've got a gotta have business. And the key thing here is that it's not all in the financial pillar. It's not just that the company makes a lot of money. The company has to operate correctly. It has to operate like what I call a real company. The CEO has to be less important to the business.
What's a real company?
Well, when you have a entrepreneurial business that somebody starts at some point and years later it's still running with that person making all the decisions and that person deciding how to do things and not having written procedures and processes and that person not having plans and strategies, those are all the things that you find in larger businesses. I want my clients to operate their business and design their business for how they want it to be when they're twice as big or three times as big, and continually look towards the future and invest in their business. And one of the things that makes them a real company versus just an entrepreneurial type business is that CEOs of real companies can't sacrifice future value for short-term profitability. And many, what I would refer to as non-real companies, the ownership is taking money out all the time. The ownership doesn't look at money into the business as an investment. It looks at it as a cost. And so if you're committed to creating value, you have to be continually investing in the support and the infrastructure of the business and to continually look forward to where you want to take that business, have what I call a strategic value vision out there. Where do I want this business to be and what do I want it to look like and how do I want it to operate? And I'm not going to be totally focused on the profit I'm making tomorrow or next week. I'm looking at what the value of the business is going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. What am I going to be able to pass down to the rest of my family?
So I think that whole notion of focusing on short-term profits at the expense of long-term benefit is one of the big mistakes that many leaders make. What are some other mistakes that you've seen that CEOs make when it comes to running or not running value-based businesses?
Well, I think I mentioned one of them before, but it's worth talking about again, and that's they cannot be the only or the core of the business. They have to be the CEO. They have to make big decisions, but in fact, one way to check yourself out if you want is think about all the decisions you make in a day or a week and then look at the level of that decision. If those are small decisions you're making as the CEO and you have a team that should be making those decisions, then you're probably not in that leadership role of a quote unquote real business. So moving yourself out, and that's very difficult for a founder owner of a business to start to admit that they're not as important to this business as they think they are. But it's really critical. So when I took over that company 6 years ago, and there was about 250 employees, and shortly after I had taken it over, one of the people on the leadership team, at least the existing leadership team that was there when I got in, stopped me one afternoon or late afternoon and said, "So Joel, when are you going to be here at 7 or 8 o'clock at night yelling at us what we have to do tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, I'm never going to be doing that." I said, "You're there in that position. You're being paid to do the job. I'm trusting you to do it. If you can't do it, then we'll find someone else. But you have to do it. I don't have to do that." Well, that was the culture that I had walked into, was that there was one person, my predecessor was a CEO that did everything and made every decision. And everybody waited around until they made the decision or until the CEO told them what to do. So my biggest job in creating a real company in this situation, even though it looked like a real company from the outside, 250 employees, engineering, manufacturing, all the good stuff we were doing, was to really get into the culture of the business and make that leadership team and the rest of the business understand, first of all, where we were going. What was our vision for what we were trying to accomplish? And the other thing that I see lots of CEOs not do that I tried very hard to do was to communicate that vision and then communicate it again and again. And, my feeling is that one of the things CEOs don't do enough is communicate. So once I've communicated it, I want to do it again. I have to keep reminding them. So we had obviously weekly leadership meetings, but we had monthly all company meetings. And I had, in a series of 2 or 3 sessions, because we didn't have a room big enough for everybody, I communicated to every single employee in that company where we were going, what we had accomplished, and then had them involved in the meeting to make presentations on what was happening in their areas. So it was, we had to change that from a leader run business, or I should say managed business, and make it a leader business. And that was my biggest challenge, and many of my clients' biggest challenges. And the ones that are successful in making that transition and getting their team to take over, if you will, because they know where they're going, they know what the objectives are, they know what the culture will accept and not accept, and they work with their people to become more and more involved. Those are the ones that create some great value and become gotta haves and actually sell their business someday for a lot of money.
Thank you for sharing that. There's so much I want to unpack. Maybe unpick and
I'm
unpack.
Sure you do.
Let me ask about this theory that I have, and I want to check it against your experience. In that, when you're talking about the life cycle of a business, that the style of CEOship needs to shift. So it's like when you start out, let's say you're owner founder, it's a different kind of gear that you need to be in than when you've built it to, as when you took over this manufacturing organization, to 250. It's kind of operating well. It's got a substantial presence. You can't stay in that founder gear. You need to shift into a different gear. In your experience, does that mean you need to be like you probably need to get a new CEO in, or is it possible for CEOs themselves to change gears, to have all the energy of a founder driver and then a different kind of focus and energy and style for a consolidator, to a different then style again to being a renewal growth CEO? What do you think? Can it be the same person, or does it have to necessarily be a different person?
I think it can be the same. It's very difficult. There's not too many of us who can go through that transition. I had a number of clients over the years that became really wonderful businesses when the CEO just realized that they weren't the right person to take it. A quick story about that's actually in the book as well is the client that I started working with when the company was at $15 million in sales and revenue. And the founder owner said to me, I know I can't keep running this business. I'm at my max. I like the technical part of the business. I'm a great designer and technical guy. I know the industry, but I know I can't take it any further. And the family and the existing CEO, owner CEO, decided that they wanted their vision was to get to $100 million in revenue in 10 years and sell the business for a lot of money. And they knew they had to bring in an outside CEO. So we brought someone in who had been to the mountain, if you will, had taken a company to $100 million. And that person then worked through and was able to lead the company there. But the key was that the founder owner didn't interfere. The founder owner was the board chair, and he let this CEO do what he had to do and truly be the owner and run the business. So there has to be a common vision. And so to answer your question, yes, it can happen, but I've seen more successes when at a certain point, if you reach you need to understand where your level is or where your limit is, and then maybe move it ahead or sell the business. Did I answer your question?
I'm so curious about this. It does. And I'm like, part of me wants to say, of course it's possible for someone to shift gears. And I'm like, if it is possible, why don't people do it? What is stopping them? And I don't think it's necessarily that they don't have the capacity for it, but it might be they don't have. I think what needs to happen, if it's going to be the same person to shift in a different mode, they kind of need to shift a few things. Your values, what's exciting to you, your energy modality, and definitely how you lead and manage.
Exactly.
You got to be happy with changing those things. And I think what I know of, and you might have a different experience, I'm not sure, of founder CEOs, startups, they're single-minded, extremely creative, focused, and driven. There's a whole bunch of energy that goes into creative process, and parallel can also be, because of all that, get caught in a power trap, ego trap, and are very ego-oriented towards getting this thing off the ground. Am I wrong about that, or what's your experience in that?
No, I think you're 100% right. Again, the CEOs that start their business because of some intelligence in technology or something that really turns them on, and they become successful because they're so good at that, and their company thus becomes so good at that. And I'll tell you another quick story if we have time, is the CEO that I worked with that called me up one day. I had been working with him on some things and trying to convince them to make some changes in his business. He had a great business. It was a technology-based business, and he was smart as anything, a real strong electronics engineer. And he called me up and said that somebody was interested in buying his business. They were talking about a $25 million purchase price, and they were going to come in and do their due diligence. Well, they did. They came in and did their due diligence. They came back to report the due diligence. We were sitting in a meeting, and I said to my client, they're probably going to find ways to bring the level down a little bit. I don't think they're going to come out with 25 million, but we'll figure this out. And they came back and they said, you got a great business here. It's making money, but we cannot make this deal. And my client looked at him and said, what do you mean you can't make the deal? We got a great business. We're doing all this stuff. And they said, there's one major problem. And they looked at him and they said, you're the problem. They said, this business is one heartbeat away from a disaster. And my client just went, but I know everything about this business. I've grown it. He goes through his whole argument, and they looked at him and they said, that's exactly what we're talking about. You never graduated to the next level. You've got great engineers here. You've got a lot of people, but you haven't let go of this thing, and you haven't, because my client had never been a leader before. This wasn't his thing. He was a technical guy. So what we did is we shifted him into a role of like a chief technology officer, and we brought in a CEO. And 3.5 years later, he sold the business not for $25 million, but for $75 million because we had really redone that business. So yeah, couple of great stories of making families wealthy. So
that's a good payoff for parking your ego and letting go of control.
Exactly.
I'll take those returns.
That's why you asked why I wrote the book and what my whole basis of my consulting is. It's that people who are in those positions, the founder owners of these kind of businesses, if they can just start thinking about creating really great businesses and what it takes to do that, and going through this checklist of what the components of the strategic value are. And key is, and I'm sure you'll agree from a leadership standpoint, they have to be honest. They have to be honest with their employees, but they have to be honest with themselves. They can't be kidding themselves in terms of, I can do that. I know I can get there.
That's great. There's one part that I was curious about in the book that didn't seem to play a big part, at least it wasn't one of the 4 pillars. And I'm curious about that. And that's culture. It's like people. So your 4 pillars are financial, strategic, operational, and industry. What about the people? What about the culture? How does that fit within your framework?
That falls into the operational. There's a component in there of culture. I don't call it culture, but it's the people and the structure and the organization and how it operates. And I don't believe that there's one right culture or one right structure for a business. It depends a lot on the type of business and what they're doing and the type of employees. But the bottom line to the culture to me is that what I call, well, it's an ownership culture, is getting everybody in the organization to behave and feel like owners of the business. And I remember when I took that position and I went to the board, and the board was made up of shareholders, of owners, of children of the founder. And I said, I'm going to make everybody in this company an owner. And I thought their mouths would hit the table because they saw it as, well, we can't give them shares. They said, don't worry about giving them shares. We're going to make them feel, I want everyone in this business to feel like their name is on the door, that it's John's or Sally's business. When they come in, they're so proud of this that they're going to take care of our customers the right way. They're going to make good product. They're going to think about how they're doing it. That's how we need to have everybody thinking. That's the main core piece of, at least from my standpoint, of what I believe is necessary in a culture, and then move it on to what works best in your type of an organization.
So how do you do that? I mean, I work with CEOs all the time, and their executive, like, one of the struggles is with their executive teams. And one of their chief complaints with their executive teams is that they don't take whole of organizational perspective. They just focus on their own business unit. And that's just the executive team, let alone the service delivery people. How do you instill that this is my company, it's, I imagine, my name on the door, without setting up an entitlement aspect to that? You know, if it's my company, where's my pay packet? Where's my bonus, kind of thing? So yeah, that's a long-winded question too. How do you instill that ownership mindset?
Well, let me say that, first of all, I need to, and it's in the book as well, is that the important people in the organization don't stop at the executive level. Every person in the organization is critical to the satisfying our customers and creating a great company. So with that in mind, the biggest hurdle is usually the executive team, because of what you said. So we have to find ways to make it so that it's not, I don't get rewarded for having a great engineering department if we can't make the product. Or I don't get rewarded for, so again, what I did when I was in that position as CEO, after replacing some of the leadership team because they just were too stuck in the old ways and the old company mentality, and they couldn't make the change to the new culture. Once I got the team where I wanted it in terms of people, we restructured the business to provide ownership of an area. So I own this product line. And now I need to make sure that everybody that's below me in this, from the people who are cutting the metal to the people who are assembling the product, to even back to the people who are engineering the product, have to be focused on this. We just had to cut away the dependencies across lines that said, well, you can't, my work is too important, so I cannot help you on your work. We found ways to break through that barrier a little bit, to get it to the point where we had leadership team members volunteering people to help other leadership team members' areas of responsibility. And it didn't happen overnight. It just was constant. I talked about communication before. It was just constant. And it was just taking this leadership team and making sure that they understood it and then pushed it down. We were consulting once with a client, and one of my consultants who was working with me, we were trying to figure out why the company wasn't able to change the way we envisioned them changing. And she called the leadership team an impermeable membrane. So we're telling the leadership team, here's what we need to be doing. Here's where you have to be going with this company. And they would walk out of the meeting, oh, yes, yes, yes. but then it never trickled down into the rest of the business. So it's really important that the CEO understand what's happening in the business and what's being communicated and understand what's out there and who's doing what. And I made daily trips through the plant to talk to people because I wanted to hear what the assembly people and the machinists and the warehouse people were talking about and what they were doing and whether or not they were caring as much as we were hoping they would be caring. And when you went out there and saw people sticking around or taking their own pickup truck to the UPS depot because they missed the shipment, then you knew you had some people really thinking the right way.
So let me just check then. So in your experience, it's the executive team that can be the cause of some of these silos and not we're all one company when each person is an owner mindset. And your way to get them to see through that is to emphasize that we need to help each other and to get out of your work is not more important than somebody else's. And so get your head out from your turtle. And I don't even know, that's not even an expression, and I'm not even sure about the visual of that, but get your head out the door and go and help your mate. Is that the persistent rallying cry?
Well, I think it all comes back up to the CEO, to the person who's directing the culture, if you will. The buck stops at the top there. And the CEO has to set the groundwork for this. It isn't something that it just doesn't change overnight. It's going to take some time to do this, but the CEO has to be, if they're going to be a CVO, a Chief Value Officer, and really be focused on creating value in the business, they have to be focused on that. That's their number one job. How do I get this organization functioning the way a quote unquote real company would operate? And how do I get them to understand? And I have to start up with the top level. And again, sometimes one of the things I talk about in the book is that as a CEO or CVO, you have to make some tough decisions. You have to sometimes just, that person that's been with the company for a long time is a nice person. We don't want to hurt them, but they're not helping us in our travel to a high value. They'd be better off somewhere else, and the company would be better off somewhere else. So creating the team with the right people and putting them in the right places. I know that's a trite saying already, but it's really critical to achieving that value that you want.
I think it's similar to the conversation we were having earlier about can you be the same person at different stages of the organizational cycle? With the heads of, like the senior executive, it can be the same person, and it's often a mindset and value shift that needs to happen. If they're so used to looking after their own silo, to get a new mindset, a new perspective of collaboration, mutual support, it's a change of focus and it's a different way of operating. And there does need to be a different definition of success. So I'm curious about that question, actually. How does the definition of success change in the shift from CEO to CVO?
So the definition of success the day that I walked into that CEO job was how much money is going to be distributed out to the shareholders next month. And how much money am I going to be bonused as the CEO, my predecessor, be bonused because we made a lot of profit this month. And that had a shift to how much value are we going to create in this business. And it was a training process that I had to go through to change the way the board looked at success, because I didn't look at success the same way. If we're going to build value in this business, we need to measure, our metric has to be the value of the business, not how much cash we took out this month. So it's a situation of really defining what success means to the business. It can be a shorter window, or it can be something that's going to happen like we did, like I mentioned with that one client 10 years from now. Our measure of success is we're going to do $100 million worth of sales, profitable sales, in 10 years, and we're going to sell the business for a lot of money. That was their vision. And that was how they measured their success. Did I answer your question?
You did. So it's the principle of delayed gratification. And, it's short-term gain versus long-term gain. And if you're sacrificing long-term gain for short-term gain, then you have a very different definition of success.
Yes.
I think that sort of answers it for me. Yeah, nice. And then spinning off onto that is like, you can't burn people, you can't burn the culture, you can't burn each other, you can't burn the customer. And it's when you start thinking about that differently, your sense of love for the company changes. So what's in it for the person on the floor of the manufacturing plant? Like, they're presumably may or may not benefit from the increase of the company value. So what's in it for them?
Well, you know what? They do benefit from the increase in company value. And that's because now the company is reinvesting in the business. They're reinvesting in the employees. They may be paying the employees more money because we're not focused only on tomorrow's bottom line. We're going to get the best employees we can. From an HR standpoint, we can attract, everybody wants to work for a great company. We don't want to work for something that's awful. So it's easy to recruit when the HR people are talking it up from an honest standpoint. This is a great company. We all love working here. It's not utopia, but it's really a great place. It's easier to attract the right people. And the benefits that we did put in some, or I recommend in a lot of cases with my clients, to reward the employees in some long-term fashion that gives them a little bit more ownership. And this is financial ownership. It's not stock in the company, but boy, if we can hit our goals, if we can do these things, then we'll share it with you. And that again builds value because the employees are so critical to a great company that we want to keep them, and we want to have ways that they can look at it and say, yeah, the value that we've built in this company, whether they think of it as value or just think of it as we work for a great company, it's the same thing, because the great company is worth a lot, has a high value.
Joel, you sold me on that one. Thank you for that. That was good. The second last question I have for you is around complexity. So leading an organization which is building value is a complex exercise, and an organization is a complex beast. I mean, you've talked about the 4 pillars. There's people issues on top of that. Where's the starting point for a leader who wants to become a CVO in a complex organization? Where do they start?
Well, I have, and again, I don't want it to sound as a pitch, but my website there has an assessment that they can start with that asks them a lot of questions about each of the components of strategic value pillars. So in each pillar, here's the main topic, here's the questions. If they fill that out and submit it, then we'll score it, and they can see which, if any of the legs are really strong, they can see where their weaknesses are, at least initially, and they can get a feel for where to focus on. And then once they've assessed that and really looked at their business and become honest about where they're at, then they can start to develop their strategic value, what we call acceleration plans, and say, where's our priority? What do we have to be working on first? And start to, again, like I said before, it's not an overnight situation. It's a mindset, like you mentioned. It's a way to start people thinking in terms of where we're going and how we're going to get there, because now we're getting everybody involved in the game plan that says, here's the roadmap to value.
Okay, lovely. I'm totally going to do that assessment. This is my last question then. So how can people find the assessment and find you?
Okay, they can go to Chief Value Officers, that's a plural.com. And that is our website. And they can find me. They can find a link to buy the book. And if they desire, the assessment is free and there's no obligation. I'm not going to bug them. They'll get an assessment, a recap back that says, here's what your score is and here's why. And here's what we recommend you start to work on.
Fantastic. Joel, thank you so much. This was a delight. I love the work that you're doing out there in the world in terms of helping people see the longer, bigger picture. And I think that's of incredible value in itself. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you. It was really a pleasure.
Well, I'm glad I did that interview with Joel. He certainly answered my question because I did have doubts about this book. I'm like, where's the people factor in this book? Where is the culture piece? And I drilled him on it, and he came up with the goods. I'm convinced. He answered the what's in it for me from an employee's point of view in terms of building long-term value in a company. I just couldn't see it just from the outset of reading the book, and maybe I have to go back in and dive into some of the key pillars again. But he nailed it. Basically, you create a gotta-have culture. So who doesn't want to work for a company that's gotta have the reputation, the enjoyment of all? But his key point is that when you're focusing on long-term value, you reinvest in the company. You increase the benefits for staff. You invest in the staff capacity. So the staff get benefits and development and are part of a contributing whole and seen as an integral part of the long-term value proposition. So a great culture delivers on a great strategy. And that sort of summed it up for me. And I think that was a good point that he made. This is the kind of work that I love to do, actually, is helping organizations suss out, determine, identify, and plan and maintain an awesome culture. I love this work. I think it's fantastic. I also love facilitating strategy sessions. So when you're building your culture and looking to what does this organization really mean to do? What are our strategies to get there? I love working with organizations to help discover and unpack their opportunities. And the other thing I love to do is to build the leadership capacity. I love doing leadership training. So if any of those things float your boat and you're looking for a gal to come and help you be successful in those, hey, that's me. Reach out, send me an email, give me a call. It's zoe@encompass.com.au. And we can start a conversation, see where you're up to, where your organization is up to, and see how I can best serve you. Coming up on the podcast, a couple of things. We've got next week a couple of book reviews on our theme of leading in complex systems. And we have the wonderful Kate Christensen, another interview coming up. And she is well known for tackling the curly questions, the curly strategic questions, and dealing with wicked problems. So that's going to be a fun one too. And as always, if you're enjoying the show, it would be such a fabulous thing for you to rate and review the podcast. It does crank up your own good karma points from the good karma fairies, of course. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.